Welcome, and thank you for joining this lecture. What I will share with you today is based on the work of Virginia Braun and Victoria Clarke, especially their foundational 2006 article on thematic analysis and their subsequent writings where they have developed and clarified their approach. I also build on later contributions such as Gareth Terry and Nikki Hayfield's paper, which offers further reflections and refinements. This lecture should be seen as my interpretation of reflexive thematic analysis, not a definitive or final word on the subject. I am not speaking on behalf of the authors of these works. Instead, my aim is to present one possible way of understanding and applying reflexive thematic analysis in practice. As with all qualitative methods, it is important that we, as researchers, engage critically and thoughtfully, and use the methods in ways that are congruent with our research questions, our philosophical stance, and our scientific judgment. So, what you will hear today is both grounded in established scholarship and shaped by my own reading and experience. I invite you to listen with curiosity and to think about how this approach might be useful in your own research practice. Thematic analysis is an umbrella term for approaches that identify patterned meaning across a data set. Think of it as a family, not a single recipe. Different versions share an interest in patterns but differ in underlying values, the role of the researcher, and procedures. This matters because quality depends on coherence between your question, your philosophical stance, and your enactment of the method. Today we focus on reflexive thematic analysis, where researcher subjectivity is treated as an analytic resource and themes are meaning-based stories rather than topic lists. Having established this foundation, the next slide explains why you might deliberately choose the reflexive version. Reflexive TA is popular because it travels well across disciplines and data types while keeping interpretation at the center. Rather than pretending we can eliminate the researcher, RTA recognizes that our situated perspectives help us notice, question, and connect meanings. The outcome is not a frequency table of topics, but a small set of themes that tell an interpretive story about the data. If your aim is to produce depth, nuance, and theoretically sensitive claims, RTA is a strong fit. To sharpen this choice, the next slide pinpoints situations where RTA is especially appropriate. Choose RTA when you want to explain meanings in context rather than measure agreement between coders. It is well suited to experiential questions about lived practice and to critical questions about how meanings are constructed and contested. Success looks like a coherent analytic narrative where each theme has a clear central organizing concept and contributes to the overall story of the dataset. To avoid confusion later, we now need to locate RTA among the three broad schools of thematic analysis, which is our next slide. There are three broad approaches you will encounter. Coding reliability TA aims for standardized coding through fixed codebooks, multiple independent coders, and intercoder reliability statistics. It sits closer to positivist values. Codebook TA uses structured frameworks or templates, but keeps qualitative values in view, useful in applied settings with predefined information needs. Reflexive TA is different. Coding is open and organic. The researcher's interpretation is central, and quality is shown through reflexivity and coherence, not agreement metrics. Mixing logics across these schools leads to methodological incoherence, so it is vital to be explicit about which lane you are in. With that clarified, the next slide turns to three key decisions you must declare and enact consistently in RTA. In reflexive TA, you must make three deliberate choices and keep them aligned from start to finish. First, orientation. An inductive orientation means letting the dataset lead. Your codes arise from engagement with the material, which is valuable in under-researched areas. A deductive orientation means you bring a sensitizing theoretical lens, for example, behavior change theory, gender theory, or critical disability studies, to shape what you notice and how you interpret. Most projects sit on a spectrum between these poles, What matters is that you state your leaning and show it in your coding and theme names. Second, depth. Semantic coding stays close to what is explicitly said and is helpful for experiential accounts and traceability. Latent coding explores the assumptions, values, or discourses that underpin what is said. It is powerful for critical or theory-building work, but demands explicit reflexivity. You can combine them, for instance, coding semantically and then interpreting latently when constructing themes, but do so intentionally. Third, theoretical stance. A realist or essentialist stance treats accounts as relatively direct windows onto experience. A critical realist or contextualist stance assumes a material reality exists, but our knowledge of it is mediated by socio-cultural context and language. Here, themes connect embodied or material conditions with meaning. A relativist or constructionist stance focuses on how language constitutes realities, so themes trace the construction of meaning rather than discover a single truth. Choose a stance that fits your question and keep your claims consistent with it. Do not adopt a relativist stance and then claim objective accuracy via intercoder reliability. Remember, Reflexive TA sits within Big Q qualitative research, which values subjectivity and interpretation, unlike small Q approaches that borrow qualitative tools but retain positivist criteria. With our stance declared, let's overview the 6 phases we are about to traverse in detail. The 6 phases at a glance. Reflexive TA unfolds through 6 recursive phases that deepen your understanding: familiarizing yourself with the data, coding systematically, generating initial themes, developing and reviewing those themes, refining, defining, and naming them, and finally writing the report. These phases are not a rigid sequence. You will move back and forth as insights evolve, but they offer a clear scaffold. In the next slide, we begin with Phase 1, familiarization, because everything you do later rests on how well you do this first step. Phase 1, familiarization. We begin our analytic journey with the familiarization phase. This is sometimes overlooked, but it is absolutely foundational. Many researchers are eager to jump straight into coding, because coding feels like the real analytic work. But if we do not first invest in truly knowing our data, our later coding will risk staying superficial. Familiarization is about immersion, about spending enough time with your material until it feels alive and present to you. A useful metaphor is snorkeling. At first, the ocean may feel overwhelming, the depth intimidating, but snorkeling is not about diving deep all at once. It is about taking a gentle, curious look just beneath the surface, without too much pressure, simply noticing what is there. Now, it is important to stress that not all approaches to thematic analysis treat this phase in the same way. For example, some forms such as template analysis use familiarization to already start shaping something close to themes. But in reflexive thematic analysis, that is not the goal at this stage. Here, the outcome should be nothing more structured than casual notes, your initial impressions, observations, and feelings as you engage with the data. These are your first relaxed interactions. They are not themes, and they are not meant to be. If you have collected the data yourself, say through interviews, you will of course already have some familiarity. Still, it is good practice to revisit the transcripts or responses as texts, to read them carefully at least a couple of times, and to write down your reflections as you go. And one last point, try not to confine your notes to the margins of the transcripts themselves. That can make your thinking too constrained. Instead, use a blank page or document where you can write more freely about what you notice. Whether that is recurring ideas, striking phrases, or even your emotional reactions to what participants are saying. These open, early notes form the bedrock of your later analysis, and they remind you that reflexive TA is a process of gradual deepening, not premature closure. Phase 2, systematic coding. When we spoke about familiarization, I described it as dipping your head beneath the surface of the water just to see what was there. Now we move to the next stage, coding. If familiarization was that first look, coding is more like diving down into the reef, studying the coral and noticing the fish in detail. At this point, you need to adopt a more systematic and analytic mindset. Coding means breaking your data into smaller parts, assigning labels to meaningful chunks, and beginning to interpret them. Your research question is your compass here. Whether your approach is inductive and data-led or deductive and theory-led, the question should always guide your decisions. A practical tip is to literally keep the research question in sight, on a sticky note next to your transcripts, for example, so it anchors your analytic choices. So, what does coding involve? In reflexive thematic analysis, coding is not just a technical step. It is a way of engaging deeply with the material. We can think about two kinds of codes. Semantic codes stay close to the data. They describe surface meanings, much like noticing the colors or shapes of a fish. For instance, a semantic code could be fatigue as persistent and debilitating, directly reflecting how participants spoke. Latent codes go beneath what is explicitly said. They explore underlying ideas or assumptions, drawing on theory and prior knowledge. To return to the reef metaphor, it's like identifying the species of the fish and how it interacts with the ecosystem. For example, the concept of affective reciprocity, the expectation of emotional give and take, can inform latent coding. Most beginners start with semantic codes, which is completely fine. Latent codes usually come with experience and deeper theoretical engagement. Another crucial point is the naming of codes. Well-crafted labels are invaluable, especially later when you're working only with the codes themselves. A good label can act as a shorthand for complex meaning. For example, uphill battle for progress conveys a whole story of struggle with illness or injury. Labels won't always be so striking, but aim for names that are both concise and interpretive. In practice, early coding often produces a new code for almost every section of text. It's usually better to code broadly at first, rather than risk overlooking something relevant. Later, as you refine your analysis, you'll see which codes recur, which can be reused, and which parts of the dataset may not serve your research focus. Above all, coding is about consistency and engagement. Think of it as carefully charting the underwater landscape before you begin weaving your interpretation of the reef as a whole. You are ready for the next slide, where we begin shaping codes into candidate themes. Phase 3. Generate initial themes. Let's move on to a really important point. Themes in reflexive thematic analysis don't simply emerge from the data. This idea has been emphasized again and again by Braun and Clarke. Instead, themes are actively constructed by us as researchers. They are not hidden inside the dataset waiting to be discovered. They are meaning-based patterns that we build by engaging with our codes. Now, for many students and novice researchers, the difference between a code and a theme can feel a little confusing. Here's a useful way to think about it. Codes are small nuggets of interest. They are usually generated early in the analytic process and tend to capture a single idea. Themes, on the other hand, are larger, more complex constructions. They are built by clustering several codes together in a way that helps you tell a meaningful story about your dataset. So, if codes are the building blocks, then themes are the larger structures, the houses that you build from those blocks. At this stage, it's important to keep in mind that your themes are still prototypes. They are not finished products. Think of them as working drafts, possibilities that you're testing out. It's very common at this stage to create more themes than you will end up using. Later, you'll probably merge some, discard others, and even create new ones out of what remains. This is all part of the process, and because it's about exploration, don't commit too early. Play with the material, test different connections, and allow yourself to be surprised. In fact, this process should feel engaging, even fun. Some people like to do it with sticky notes on a wall, others in Excel or in digital platforms like Miro. The exact tool doesn't matter. What matters is that you're clustering codes around central ideas that feel significant for your research question. At first, these clusters will be small and tentative, but over time, as you explore, the clusters start to merge into something larger and more meaningful. These decisions, whether to merge, split, or promote a code into something bigger, are interpretive acts. They are made at the intersection of three things: the data itself, your research question, and your own interpretive lens. Now, what makes a theme is not just a broad topic. A theme needs to be held together by a central organizing concept, something that captures the meaningfulness of what you're seeing. Let me give you an example. In one study on men's embodiment, researchers could have clustered codes under the broad topic of fatigue. But that's just a category. It doesn't yet tell us much. By contrast, a theme such as fatigue disrupts the performance of abled masculinity captures a deeper story. It brings together diverse codes and links them to broader concepts like masculinity, ability, and performance. That's the difference between a category and a theme. But remember, this is still provisional. That fatigue theme might not be strong enough to stand alone. It might need to be combined with other clusters that also speak to changing physical capacities and masculinity. Out of that, a stronger prototype theme could form, such as meanings of masculinity shift with changing capabilities. That's closer to a final theme, but it still needs to be tested against other possible themes in your dataset. Finally, if you're working in a team, each researcher might develop their own story of the data. When you come together, don't be worried if your themes look quite different. In reflexive thematic analysis, consensus is not the goal. What matters is the discussion, the shared meaning-making that happens when you compare interpretations. That dialogue often brings out new insights that no single person would have reached alone. Phase 4. Develop and review themes. Now that you've constructed some prototype themes, it can be tempting to think, great, the analysis is done. But in reflexive thematic analysis, that's not quite the case. This next phase is about review and development, and it's crucial. The analytic mindset here is one of clarifying, questioning, and developing. Think of it as a quality check, but also as an opportunity to sharpen your work and strengthen your final analysis. The first step is to revisit your dataset and your coded material. Ask yourself, do my themes really map back onto the data they came from? Have I moved too far away from what participants actually said? Or am I perhaps focusing too much on what I personally found most interesting? Reflexivity is key here because we need to be honest with ourselves about whether we're cherry-picking, consciously or unconsciously. This step is especially important because when you write up your analysis, you'll need to evidence your claims with data extracts. So now is the time to check, can I clearly see the evidence for these thematic ideas in my dataset? If yes, you're in a strong position to move forward. It's also worth reviewing your themes both individually and as a set. Do they work well on their own? Do they hold together as a coherent group? One practical strategy that many researchers find helpful is creating theme documents. These documents can include the central organizing concept of the theme, sometimes even a short definition, plus a set of data extracts to illustrate it. Some researchers do this manually, others use qualitative data analysis software. The point is not the tool, it's about having resources that allow you to see clearly whether your themes are really analytic. Are they doing more than just summarizing the data? Do they have a conceptual hook? Are they starting to tell a meaningful analytic story? Another advantage of keeping theme documents is that they provide an audit trail, something particularly valuable in team-based projects. If everyone can see the same material, you can make shared decisions with transparency while still allowing for interpretive diversity. And while you are reviewing, keep your research question in mind. It's easy to drift off course and become fascinated by interesting patterns that don't actually help answer your question. Sometimes this means you need to refocus or even adapt your research question if the data really demand it. One of the biggest challenges at this stage is letting go. Many researchers feel reluctant to drop themes that are personally compelling, but don't contribute to the overall analytic story. But remember, the goal is not to report every single detail for every single participant. The goal is to craft an interpretation that tells a coherent and meaningful story of the dataset. And finally, don't forget, this is reflexive thematic analysis. That means your reflexivity remains central in this phase. Your interpretation is informed not only by the data, but also by your theoretical lens, your understanding of the field, and the unique connections you see between different aspects of the dataset. That is not a weakness, it's the strength of the method. Now we arrive at phase 5, naming and defining themes. At this point, you have already built a strong foundation. You know your data well, you have coded systematically, and you have started to shape initial themes. What happens here is about sharpening and crystallizing those themes so that they truly capture the story you want your analysis to tell. This stage requires both precision and creativity. Think of it as distilling all your analytic work into short, powerful definitions and titles. A good test is this. If someone only read your theme names and definitions, would they still understand the essence of your findings? If yes, then you are on the right track. Definitions are not just formalities. They help you check the strength of your themes. If you struggle to summarize a theme in just a short paragraph, perhaps it is still too vague or underdeveloped. On the other hand, if you find yourself writing page after page, it might mean that the theme is too broad and needs to be broken down or restructured. A theme title should work almost like a headline. It should give your reader an immediate sense of the organizing idea. Sometimes researchers borrow words directly from participants to create engaging names. Other times, a combination of a vivid phrase and a clarifying subtitle works best. For example, using a participant's quote followed by a colon, and then your own descriptive phrase. It is important to remember that naming and defining are not final, one-off actions. This phase connects back to earlier stages, and you may revisit and adjust your titles and definitions as your analysis develops further, even during the writing up stage. In essence, what you are doing here is giving form to the analytic heart of your study, clarifying boundaries, articulating what each theme really means, and ensuring that the pieces fit together to tell a coherent and compelling story of your dataset. Phase 6. Writing up. We now arrive at the sixth and final phase, writing up. In reflexive thematic analysis, writing is not just about presenting your findings, it is itself part of the analytic journey. As you write, you continue to test your ideas, refine your interpretations, and strengthen the connections between your themes. At this stage, you already have a rich set of resources from earlier phases, your coding, your notes, and the theme definitions you have drafted. These become the foundation for the writing. From there, you select vivid and telling extracts from your data and weave them together with your analytic commentary to form a narrative that communicates the story of your analysis in a clear and persuasive way. One of the key challenges is choice. You will almost certainly have more compelling quotations and examples than you can possibly use. The task is to select those that best capture the essence of the theme, while also showing that your claims are supported across multiple participants or sources. A strong write-up requires balance. You need to find the right equilibrium between presenting data extracts and providing your interpretation, and between your analytic insights and your engagement with existing literature. There are also some pitfalls to watch out for. One is the temptation to let the data speak entirely for themselves, presenting long extracts without adding your own analytic voice. Another is simply paraphrasing what participants said. Both of these approaches risk reducing your analysis rather than strengthening it. Your task is to interpret, to articulate meaning, and to give shape to what the data are telling you. Although you will likely have named your themes earlier, this is also an opportunity to refine those names further. Sometimes a small adjustment or a more engaging phrasing can better capture the central idea at the heart of a theme. By this point, you are deeply immersed in your material. Think of the writing up phase not simply as the end, but as your final opportunity to polish your work and to bring together everything you have done into a coherent, compelling story that truly represents your analysis. Now, in some areas, for example in foundational sciences education, it is not always common practice to bring literature directly into the results section. Many scholars do argue for the advantages of doing so, as it can demonstrate how your findings connect with, extend, or challenge what is already known. Personally, however, I tend to prefer creating that tension and dialogue with the literature in the discussion section. For me, that placement allows the analytic story to stand more clearly on its own in the results, before situating it in the wider field. Optional step: reflexive quality check. Before we truly consider our analysis finished, I want to suggest one final optional step, and that is to read through the text with Braun and Clarke's newly developed values-based reporting guidelines in mind. Now, these guidelines are not meant to be rigid checklists. Instead, they are designed as a framework, a way of asking ourselves whether our writing really reflects the core values of qualitative research. At the heart of these guidelines are two important principles. The first is methodological congruence. This means making sure that every part of the research fits together, from our philosophical stance to our analytic process, to the way we present our findings. If something feels out of place, for example, if we try to combine positivist quality criteria like bias control into a reflexive analysis, that is a sign that coherence may be missing. The second principle is reflexive openness. This is about being transparent with our choices, our position, and the values guiding our work. It is not about ticking boxes, but rather about showing the reader how and why we made the decisions we did. So this last step is not just about proofreading. It is about holding our text up against these quality values and asking, does this report communicate our analysis with integrity, with coherence, and with reflexive honesty? Thank you so much for listening. The content of this lecture has been based primarily on Virginia Braun and Victoria Clarke's seminal 2006 article on thematic analysis, as well as their later works. I have also drawn on the important contributions and refinements made by Gareth Terry and Nikki Hayfield. What I have presented here is one possible interpretation of reflexive thematic analysis. It is not meant to speak on behalf of any of these authors, nor to claim authority over their work. Ultimately, it is our responsibility as researchers to use this method in line with our own scientific understanding and judgment. I also want to encourage you to explore other qualitative approaches. When, like me, you begin to move more freely between different approaches, you may notice that the similarities across methods. There are several common factors that run through qualitative research, and I think we need to talk more about those shared elements. So rather than becoming a strict follower of any single method, I believe in a spirit of methodological openness, allowing our research questions to guide the choice of method rather than the other way around. Thank you again for your attention, and I hope this lecture inspires you to engage with reflexive thematic analysis and qualitative research more broadly with both curiosity and critical reflection.